We have left the battlefields around the Somme. Now we're at Vimy Ridge, another Canadian memorial park here on the Western Front. We're going to take the self-guided tour. It's very windy and there's a few rainstorms coming through. But as always, the Canadians have done an amazing job preserving their national treasures here on battlefields across northern France. Let's go check out Vimy Ridge. Vimy Ridge is a ridge that runs north-south. It sits about 500 feet above the surrounding farmland and plains. The Germans dug in along its ridge, and as we know from previous battlefields, the Germans were very good at their defense works. The French tried to dislodge them in 1915 at the cost of 200,000 casualties. The British were not that much more successful at it. And then along came the Canadians, and they attacked Vimy Ridge in the spring of 1917 and led one of the few successful attacks and gains of the war. They did capture it. Canada at the time of World War I was a very young country, and once Great Britain declared war on Germany in 1914, Canada, being a dominion of the Commonwealth, was also at war. A lot of Canadians joined up for adventure and to fight for king and country, and I'm pretty sure quickly the realities of trench warfare were brought home to their minds. You can see here just the damage done. I think we're somewhere between the lines right now. It's all kinds of trenches and mines. This is a German observation post. These are the craters that lie between the Canadian lines, which are on that side, and the German lines that are on that side. I think this here is a German observation post. I'm not going to crawl in there. It looks really tiny. You'll notice the electric fences around here. They don't want us walking into the craters between no man's land because there's still unexploded ordnance from the battle lurking around. Says here that this battlefield monument was gifted to the Canadians from the French government. I believe they purchased the land at Beaumont Hamel on the Somme, which we saw yesterday. So essentially, we're standing on a piece of North America and Canada and Europe. The Canadians named specific craters after hometowns back in Canada. And this here is called Broadmarsh Crater. Don't know where Broadmarsh is or what that location actually represents, but that's the name of this crater. And you can see how much it was bombed after the crater was here. There are electric fences and signs warning people not to go into the cratered landscape because of the abundance of unexploded ordnance. So that raises a problem with mowing the grass with a metallic lawnmower. It puts humans at risk. So they have solved the problem by having herds of sheep. And it looks like they rotate them to sections of the park and have them do all of the mowing, which I think it's less likely that they will detonate unexploded ordnance over a human with a heavy lawnmower. Brilliant idea. We saw the same thing at the Somme yesterday. Storm is blowing in off of the English Channel, which we're not too far from. And as luck would have it, there's this nice shelter here at the Canadian Cemetery. We're gonna hang out here as long as we need to, let the storm pass over, and make our way to other parts of the battlefield. There's this plaque here in the cemetery that says, "The land on which this cemetery stands is the free gift of the French people for the perpetual resting place of those of the Allied armies who fell in the war of 1914 to 1918 and are here honored." We made an observation that all the headstones, the writing on them are facing the cross over there. There's really no writing on our side facing this shelter or monument. I think it's almost safe enough to go out there without getting super drenched. The Givenchy Road Canadian Cemetery. It's much smaller than the one we were previously in. One thing I've been noticing walking on the crest here of Vimy Ridge is you can see the commanding view that the Germans would have had at any approaches the Allies could have made. Would have been under fire. The previous cemetery we were just at had all kinds of different regiments from Great Britain, including Canadians. This one's a bit different though. These are all maple leaves. Almost every single one of them is a Canadian grave. Not only are they all Canadian, They all died on the 9th of April 1917. I think these are casualties of the assault that they made on Vimy Ridge. This young man was from Red Deer, Alberta. I've been to Alberta. It's a very beautiful province. This young man was only 16 years old when he died. Really getting a sense of the intensity of the artillery bombardment that happened pretty much 4 straight years in this area. It's just so lumpy and churned up. It's like seasickness. I imagine if you were running through this, all the ups and downs, must have been incredibly hard terrain to move through, especially if it was all muddy. We have left no man's land in the trenches and blown up the surface over there. And all the trees have gone away. We're getting a commanding view. Surrounding countryside and cities in this area. Kind of get an idea of why this ridge was so coveted by either army. And look at that. There's the memorial. The arches at Tyne yesterday were the biggest memorial on the Western Front, built by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. But this one is, I think, way more impressive. Let's go check it out. Again, we have thousands of names of soldiers who went missing and never returned on the sides of this memorial. It's blinding, it's so bright. It's a beautiful memorial. Along the Western Front, Canadian divisions occupied it. It says right here, the Canadian Corps on the 9th of April 1917, with 4 divisions in line on a front of 4 miles, attacked and captured this ridge. Even a better view looking towards the west. On the walls of this monument 11,200 names, hand carved, and each of these individuals has an unknown grave here in France. Fought and died for Canada. This statue here is supposed to represent a young Canada mourning her dead. Well, both me and Sarah agree that the monuments here on the Western Front are very impressive, especially the one we just saw to the Canadians. And the bottom line, what I'm taking away from this battlefield site is that Vimy Ridge is kind of like Canada's beginnings as a country. You know, they were a young nation just coming about, and they had to come over here and fight for their freedom, even though they didn't even declare war on the Germans. It was the British that did it. So like yesterday at the Somme, you know, in one single day Britain lost her empire and gave birth to several other countries within their Commonwealth, most notably Canada. Good morning. It is Thursday, the 3rd of August. We have arrived at our final destination along the Western Front. We are in Belgium, in the famous town of Ieper. Ieper is a very significant location along the Western Front. It saw ferocious fighting all years of the war, between 1914 all the way up to 1918. Most famously, it had 3 great battles of Ieper. The first, second, and culminating in the great 3rd battle of Ieper near the town of Passchendaele. Ieper saw so much fighting because there was a salient here in the lines, very similar to the salient that was at the city of Verdun. A salient is a bulge in the lines, and it bulged towards the German side of the front. And it was a location that each side tried turning the flank of the front, as in they thought if they could punch through here in Flanders, that they could roll up the lines and turn the Western Front from a war of stagnant defense into a war of movement again. And right off the bat, here's the famous Cloth Hall of Ieper. It was destroyed during the war, I believe, and has been rebuilt. And we're going to go check out the In Flanders Fields Museum. It should be somewhere around the Cloth Hall here. This is the In Flanders Fields Museum inside of the Cloth Hall. All the museums we've seen have been just fantastic. Very well put together. Part of the museum, and you can pay to go up to the bell tower of the medieval Cloth Hall. There's a lot of steps up to the top. It's kind of cool. Here we are in the bell house of the tower. I think we can still go up even higher. We don't have long to wait, and these are going to go off, so hopefully we'll capture that. Oh no, we can go out here. And there's a view of evil town of Ieper. This is well worth an extra €2 a piece to come up here. This is kind of where we disembarked. The train station is over there somewhere where we got off. Actually, no. The train station's over there. We're looking south this way towards France. When the salient got developed here on the western front, the Germans occupied the hills surrounding the city. And the problem with the salient is if you're inside of it, you're subject to fire from 3 sides. And but also if you're on the inside, you can attack at any point of the salient and break out. So there's benefits and downsides to both the defender and the people on attack inside of salients. Just got done with the Flanders Fields Museum. I can't pick out a favorite one out of the 3 that we saw between Verdun, Albert, and here at Ieper. They're all very immersive, very impactful. But I have to say, out of all the cities we visited, this one here, even though it's been rebuilt, is the most grand. It's incredible. We're gonna go walk these streets tonight. Next we're gonna go into the cloth hall. It's kind of crazy that the museum is inside of that building. And then when you come out, you're greeted with one of many monuments to the soldiers of the First World War. This is the Museum of Ieper, Cloth Hall. Look at this stained glass window. Just got done going through the Museum of Ieper, and now we're going to try and get into the Cathedral of St. Martin. It's a pretty impressive church. that was fantastic. Keep in mind that entire church was reduced to a pile of rubble during the Great War, and it was all rebuilt in the 1920s. Let's go to the Menin Gate. Here we are at the Menin Gate, but unfortunately it's under construction and renovation, so we can't see it. We were able to maneuver to a position where we can get a sneak peek at the Menin Gate. It has around 11,000 names inscribed on it of souls that were lost in the battlefields around Ieper. The problem with Ieper is its name. It does not have a name that connotates a great battlefield like Verdun or Vimy Ridge or Gettysburg. In fact, I didn't even know how to pronounce its name correctly until I came to the city. I used to call it Ypres. I've heard it called all kinds of different things. The British soldiers who came here made fun of it and called it wipers. But the Menin Gate is significant because it was like a avenue that material and soldiers had to pass through to head up to the front. It was a very dangerous location. It was zeroed in and targeted by German artillery pretty much throughout the whole campaign. It has the names of thousands of soldiers who went missing and never returned. So maybe next time I come back, I'll get a chance to see it more intimately. About a kilometer past the Menin Gate, walking along the walls of the old fortress, come to yet another cemetery. In fact, there are a lot of cemeteries in this salient. Some of the biggest ones belong to the Germans. We'll go find one of those tomorrow. This is a Commonwealth one. This is the first grave I've found from a New Zealander. All these stones here in this line were New Zealanders. A lot of these graves have like different clumps with spaces in between them. Like for instance, this collection over here, they all died on the same day and they were from the same unit. So they kind of kept them grouped together. This here gives you an indication of all the cemeteries located here in the Ieper Salient. They're everywhere. Don't have time to see them all. Good morning. It is August the 4th, 2023. And if you can see that church steeple way over there, that is the town of Passchendaele, the Way of the Cross. And like most places along the Western Front, it would live up to his name, because we are at the Tyne Visitor Center of the largest Commonwealth War Graves cemetery on the Western Front. This is the visitor center. And the biggest, most obvious thing in here is a bust of the man responsible for all this, Sir Douglas Haig. So yesterday in Ieper we saw the Menin Gate and had all those names inscribed on it, and those are all the missing before August 1917. And this cemetery here at Tyne, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, these are mostly the dead and the missing of the Third Battle of Ieper. Sir Douglas Haig, after the Battle of the Somme, thought he had the war-winning strategy to attack here in Flanders, break through the German lines, and punch through and turn it into a war of movement and make it to the North Sea and capture and or liberate the German U-boat ports that were there, wreaking havoc on shipping. Long story short, it rained and rained and rained and rained after the intense long artillery bombardment. It turned this area into a sea of mud and a quagmire, and I'll just let you come to the conclusions of what happened. It was not a breakthrough, and I believe somewhere in the range of 100,000 Commonwealth casualties. And we're going to get a look at that significance here in just a moment. Most cemeteries in the Great War popped up around dressing stations, and a lot of the bodies were exhumed after the war and then interred in these cemeteries. And this is Tyne Cot. There's roughly 12,000 Commonwealth graves here. We learned earlier that these roses are genetically modified to not grow super tall, so they don't block out the inscriptions on the headstones. This was the Tyne Cot blockhouse captured by the 3rd Australian Division, 4th of October 1917. I learned that this cemetery is built in the vicinity of several German pillboxes that were on the Passchendaele Ridge, and they kind of turned this one here into a memorial. Here's the view of the cemetery from on top of the Australian Memorial. Met some really nice tour guides here from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Gave us a bit more tidbits of info about the place. Because this was an aid station, these graves here were some of the first ones planted, and notice how they're not tidy and lined up, organized like the ones off to the flanks. Very beautiful day out today for a location that's known for all of its dreary rain coming off of the North Sea. Literally, some of these graves have 2 to 4 to 8 soldiers buried under each one. It's just the nature of the fighting during this great world conflict. Very interesting that we found 2 German gravestones here in this cemetery. Here's Otto Bieber. As you reach the back of the cemetery, along these panels all the way, going this way, all the way over there, are inscribed the names of 35,000 soldiers and officers who were never found or identified. And it's a very good possibility that some of the graves down in here that say an unknown soldier of the Great War, those unknown names could very well be buried in here. And the list continue. And it looks like each panel is organized by regiment. Here's the Black Watch. But over there is the Welsh Regiment, South Lancashire. This cemetery has two German blockhouses, essentially a pillbox that they would have had a machine gun in. Very tiny in there. Don't know how they would have moved around. After leaving Tyne Cemetery, we have ridden our bikes pretty much along the northern rim of the Ieper Salient, and we are in St. Julian now at another much smaller Canadian war cemetery. And this one commemorates the Canadians in their first test of bravery during the Second Battle of Ieper in 1915. We kind of learned a lot about this one at Vimy Ridge, and it's just simply a column with a lone soldier on top of it. It says here, this column marks the battlefield where 18,000 Canadians on the British left withstood the first German gas attacks on the 22nd to the 24th of April, 1915. 2,000 fell and lie buried nearby. What's interesting about this memorial is it's kind of seated on the foundation that is a compass. It points to different parts of the salient. That way must be towards Ieper. And we have one final stop to make on this tour of the Western Front. It's the city of Langemarck. Quick bike ride from St. Julian has brought us to the northern outskirts of the village of Langemarck. We're on the German side of the lines right now. We're going to visit the cemetery of the Kindermort. Here at Langemarck, it obviously saw fighting during all years of the war here on the Ieper Salient, but it's most famous for a charge of very young student volunteers with their spiked helmets, arms locked, marching against the British lines, singing songs and they fell by the thousands. Being the occupiers, the Belgian and French governments did not really offer the Germans a lot of spaces to bury their dead. There are more dead buried here than what we saw at Tyne. I'm going to go in the little visitor center here and get some more background information, and then go check out the cemetery. Just a few more basic tidbits of information. There were French troops here too. During the First Battle of Ypres, trench lines were not dug in as extensively as they were later in the war. The German volunteers, they had some professionals, but mostly young recruits without adequate training. They marched against very well entrenched allies, the French and the British. And the Germans were singing Deutschland, Deutschland, über alles, as they marched into a tremendous amount of gunfire. What we're about to see here is one of the few German cemeteries here in the Salient. It has a humongous mass grave and some marked gravestones. This is the last place we're going to visit along the Western Front. Here it is. Kind of fitting that we began our journey along the Western Front at a German cemetery. We are also ending it at a German cemetery. In this cemetery there are roughly 44,000 victims of the Great War from the German side, and of those, about 24,000 are buried in a mass grave here. Knowing now that a lot of the victims who are buried here were students or former students, just makes me think of one of the scenes from the famous novel All Quiet on the Western Front. That story is told from the German perspective, and the main character, Paul, enlists with all of his classmates, and none of them survive by the end of the book. Kind of fitting that there's a bunch of oak trees planted here, because in Germany, that was the #1 type of tree that I saw when I was there, was a lot of oak trees. Each of these panels bears the names of those who are buried in the mass grave under this spot. And this is it right here. There's a lot in this memorial. Every single square centimeter of these panels is covered with names. Just like in the first video, here's a list of readings and books that I've used to build up my knowledge base going into the Western Front. But these are a bit different from the first video I made around Verdun and the Somme battlefields. I'm going to come back to Ernst Junger, Storm of Steel. As I said before, Ernst saw action on the Western Front pretty much the whole war, including the Somme battlefields and in the Ieper Salient. He was at Langemarck during the Third Battle of Ieper, and he writes about digging in the mud and finding the belt buckles and helmets of the Kindermorg while he was there fighting the British. Just a harrowing tale, a must-read for sure. Couldn't have done this trip without Stephen O'Shea's Back to the Front. He, over many years, walks the entire Western Front, and he had to do it in several trips, but he begins the book with his time around the Ieper Salient and at Vimy Ridge. That's how I learned about Vimy Ridge, was by reading this book and the recommendation to go see it. When I was at Vimy Ridge, I bought this book right here. It's a Battleground series, Arras. I used it a lot in making this film for a lot of just the minor statistics about the battles around Vimy Ridge and things about the memorial that were there. It covers the whole battlefield, and there's a lot in here. And this book just reminded me that there's a lot we didn't see when we were in Artois. I think that's how you pronounce it. In the region around Vimy Ridge. Passchendaele 1917 by Lynn MacDonald. A very quick read, and it pretty much just covers the British side of the Third Battle of Ypres, and writes a lot about the Battle of Passchendaele, which was the culmination, pretty much the end of the Third Battle. I used it a lot making this video. Winston Groom's A Storm in Flanders covers pretty much all three battles of Ypres and talks about the Ieper Salient from 1914 all the way to the end of the war. It's more of a reference because it covers, the whole story. And finally, we come to Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. I've always shied away from Hemingway before, but I picked up this book on a vacation backpacking trip last summer, and I couldn't put it down once I started reading it. I absolutely loved it. His style of writing, the tip of the iceberg, which leaves a lot to be implied. And it takes place on the Isonzo front in northern Italy, but there's a lot to be learned about World War I in general from reading this book. He's telling, in a way, his own story, because he was a veteran of the Great War. It's definitely a must-read in the World War I collection.